Hello and welcome to the Magic Mirror podcast. I'm your host as usual, Khan the Trinket Mage. With me is my co-host, 33 Elk.
Hello.
Additionally, we have our other co-host, Salubrious Snail.
Hello, hello.
And today we have a special guest, Quips and Guac.
Hello there.
Today's episode is going to be all about building strange decks, weird decks, decks that have some alternative goal beyond just winning normally. And we'll talk more about what that means to each of us in a second. And then afterwards, we'll get to some of your questions. But before we do that, I need to talk about today's sponsor, Card Castle, the easy way to sort your collection digitally. You can start scanning and sorting your cards today by using our link in the description below, and you'll get 1 free month of premium access. Thanks to Card Castle for sponsoring the podcast. Okay, do we want to start with examples? Because that's what I always think. We can start with maybe some examples of what we're talking about.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is I had a Maze's End deck for a while, and this was one where I wanted to build a deck around Maze's End forever, like for 10 years. And my goal was just to build kind of the strongest Maze's End deck I could and just kind of speedrun the maze. And I have kind of a video about kind of the pitfalls of that, but that sort of kind of weird combo win was the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to build decks that kind of, when you're like, I want this specific win or this specific like weird engine to come together, and it creates like a pile that ends up feeling strange. So, or I've built a lot of decks that use the card Wild Research as some sort of like value tutor looping toolbox engine, and you're kind of playing like a separate like mini game where you're trying to find this and assemble it.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, it feels like most of my decks are like not that weird. Like they work and they do their thing, and they typically have to win the game in some way. Like, I don't know. My decks all feel like they have the goal of winning in mind. They all have different goals to get there. But like, I don't know, casting Emrakul the Promised End isn't that weird. Casting, like, maybe my weirdest one is like my Bruna Gisela Gaddock deck, where it's just like, that's like a really weird lock, right? Where normally if you'd want to lock the game in any efficient manner, you'd probably do like Lavinia Knowledge Pool or something. But I'm like shooting myself in the foot here by trying to meld Brazella and then also have Gaddock in play, so that way my opponents can't cast spells except for creatures with mana value 4 or greater. It's not even that good of a lock. There's plenty of ways to get out of that. But oh yeah, no, just like I feel like I don't really build decks that have like this really like, you know, weird angle to them, because I build all my decks to like be able to win the game, because a lot of my metas are pretty cutthroat in terms of like, yeah, we all play bracket 3. As far as I'm aware, none of us have bracket 2 stuff going on. Like, we're all trying to move the game forward and win.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely an interesting distinction of weird decks, of is it playing to win or is it playing kind of purely for the weird? And I think there's kind of a little bit of gray area in there. The first couple that came to mind for me were my kind of combo deck variants, so that those definitely lean on the winning end of things. But I think I can think of a few others that me or a friend have built that have been kind of in the opposite direction a little bit.
Well, luckily we brought in an expert on building strange themed decks. I realized we didn't really like jump into what your channel is, but you specifically, Quips, focus on building around a strange theme.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the best way to put it, is sort of like challenge decks. I always think of it as sort of like weird Mythbusters style, like viewer submitted thing. There's no way you could make that happen in Magic, where a lot of the time it'll be like, I've never looked at a tutor in my life, much to Elk's like ire, but most of the time it'll be crazy things where I think the most fun I've had is like, I came up with a deck that's all 1 mana. Just like everything is in there, it's all 1 mana. And so no matter what, you're always doing something. Because I think I had like a turn or two in a game where I was like, I got nothing. I can't do anything. All my stuff is too expensive. So now I'm going to flip it around. It's only going to be 1 mana. Every turn I'll be able to drop a land and do something. And I think in making that, it was like, there's so few ways to win. Maybe there's like 5% of the deck will be actual payoffs. The other part of it is like weird goblin that's 1 mana that runs out and does something weird, has a weird ETB effect. And I think part of that is like Magic is a game, you know what I mean? And so it just depends on what brings you the dopamine. Is it like, look at this card that's older than I am in real life, but now it's doing its weird thing. It's having its moment of in the sun. And so I almost exclusively at this point build. I started my channel just doing like, hey, I saw Madam Web. Let me make that as a Magic the Gathering deck. Whereas like Shelob or something stupid. And it was just like a creative outlet where your deck doesn't always have to win, but if you're having fun with it, or you're like, me and the boys all saw Madam Web, I made a deck about it, and now it's just as bad as the movie was. Just kind of like that kind of fun.
Would you consider these bracket 1 decks?
I think I started building them before the bracket system was like established. So I definitely think that like in the heyday, I would definitely put them more bracket 1. I think as the bracket system have come out, I've been like, okay, more in the bracket 2. Like they play well. I've learned more about like drawing cards is good and having like, you know, artifacts that do mana is good. Cause sometimes you'd be like, okay, everything is 1 mana. Yeah. But I don't have any signets. I don't have ramp. I have nothing else. It's not fun. And so,
yeah, I've definitely seen some of your older videos and they're like, wow, this would not function.
yeah.
And then it's like the newer decks you're building though, certainly at very minimum clear the bracket 2 bar. Like your drunk driving deck can absolutely close out the game.
Yeah. And I think that one's one of my favorites as well, because it's such a stupid concept, but it actually is like, I made it work, which I think is like super fun, where it's like that Captain Nebulous Rex card. I don't think he's in more than like 1,000 decks on EDH Rec or something like that. Like he's such a weird card from Infinity, but the idea of like just getting behind the wheel and just throwing artifact cards at your opponents, I think I think everyone in the comments was like, hey, this would be super fun at my game table. I'm proxying it for like a one-off kind of thing. And I think it makes sense if you guys ever play D&D, like one-shots are a lot of the time where you can try out weird, wacky characters, see what you like. Yeah. And I think a lot of my decks are like that. I wouldn't ever like, you know, spend $1,000 on them. But if you got a printer or if you've got, you know, a lot of these janky cards in your collection, give it a shot, because I think it'll be, you know, fun at the game nights. Because if you're, you know, slamming games down, it gets kind of repetitive. Everyone's been like, he brought out his Simic deck. All right, I know what I'm expecting from this one. But to be like, all right, guys, I'm going to drunk drive. You're like, what does that mean? And it can, you know, bring some levity, I think, to the monotony of like, all right, we haven't gotten a new deck in forever. So it's all kind of the same thing. Now we can try something weird.
Yeah, in a way, I'm somewhat envious because you have a really good system going where you can just make as many decks as you want and pump them out. Because I imposed a stupid rule on myself when I made my channel. I was never going to talk about any deck that I didn't build in paper, because I would feel awful like peddling out a deck that just did not work. But it's kind of inbuilt in your thing, like, hey, listen, this is a goofball deck. Like, don't take it too seriously.
Yeah.
You know, like, so like you're kind of dodging that like hard.
It's
so
very much
nice.
like the don't try this at home. Like really,
exactly.
Really, like I thought of it, I came up with it. I like it theoretically, in theory, it works. It's like that thing from Oppenheimer where it's like it's impossible and yet it works, or whatever that quote is. But yeah, I think I've got a pretty nice like infinite content loop where I let the internet be weird and then I get to be weird in response, and I think it's super fun. But yeah, I do get a lot of stuff about like, play this deck, like actually try it. And I would love to. And so that's why I'm trying to build more consistently like budgeter decks, like in the $100 range, where like, yeah, we could probably all get together and try this out at, you know, MagicCon Vegas or something like that. Cause I think you guys have talked about it before, but like you can make the jankiest deck, but you throw in the One Ring, Smothering Tithe, all these other like game changer cards. And now it's like, okay, it's not really the same anymore. Now it's got like a weird shell, but the inside is like these cracked cards that everyone knows already that are in 1,000 decks. You know what I'm saying?
Do we have to bleep the term drunk driving? Is that going to affect our monetization?
I fully said drunk driving like a lot in that video. I think as long I'll do a disclaimer, hey, don't drunk drive, because that's what I did at the end of mine and it was fine. So
Yusuf, if you could put a car crash on screen so people know not to do that, that'd be epic.
I mean, I've said some crazy. I said like mana ramp killed my dad or something like that. Like, I mean, you guys ever grow up watching Filthy Frank? Like, those are some.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The internet.
But that was, I don't know if the monetization scheme was the same back then.
I think that was before the adpocalypse. So.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had a yellow dollar sign. So
I have.
What did you guys do?
I said fuck in a YouTube short.
Oh,
really? Mine is worse. I did a Kermit the Frog, and I don't know if you guys know this, but there's like a movie that he's in. Oh, it's like a Christmas Story or whatnot, where he gets like It's a Wonderful Life. And when Kermit is like, we show the timeline of when Kermit's not born, the Twin Towers are still up. So the theory is that
yeah, he did 9/11.
Kermit's existence causes 9/11. And I talked about that. I harped on that a little bit in a video and it got like ad restricted. I made like a shirt idea that was like, hey guys, if you get 10 likes on this video, I'll make a shirt. So I think I flew a little.
Yusuf, you definitely
I flew a little close to the sun.
definitely bleep that if we use anything.
Yeah, bleep that. But I definitely flew too close to the sun with that one. But I was like, objectively hilarious.
Flew too close to the towers with
Yeah,
that one.
yeah, exactly. That was the only other time though. Everything else has been chilling. YouTube like wants the money, so
I'm back.
you missed nothing.
Oh, we almost got demonetized while you were gone.
Getting all your slurs out of your system before we get back into recording.
You wanted to say something about like adding like staple cards to jank piles, Alex, right?
Oh no, I was just gonna talk about the budget component.
Oh, sorry. Never mind.
I feel like that's because there's both like the power component and the like gameplay component of that. That's definitely something I've noticed, the like kind of budget thing where I'll kind of build this cool deck online that does some kind of weird thing, and it's maybe a little niche. I don't know how interesting it's going to be in practice. I don't know how long lasting it is, but if it's cheap, I have a good excuse to buy it. Whereas if it's, a $300 pile of, expensive lands and staples and all of that, then suddenly it's a little bit less tempting. I can't justify that to myself.
Yeah, we definitely mentioned that on a previous podcast, and I talked about my Uno deck, which I think also fits this. Is I built a deck with the goal of turning Magic into Uno, and that was like a 5-color like combo deck that required very specific cards to function, and it would be really, really expensive, which is why I recommend proxying. If you want to build like something ultra jank, I would recommend proxying it to like the people out there. Don't build my Uno deck for real. Like I have a video on it. If you want to do that, you should proxy the list. I feel like if you're like at the the table at the play group and you're like, hey guys, this is my ultra jank deck that turns the game into Uno, I don't think anybody's gonna care if you have proxies.
Somebody throws down like a $2,000 card kingdom order to get your Uno deck. I don't actually know how expensive it is.
Because it's a 5-color deck and I was proxying the whole thing, I just put an optimized mana base in there. So it has all 10 duels and all the fetches.
Yeah, that'll do it.
So it is a really expensive, I mean, like, you could build it with a cheaper mana base. You don't actually need dual lands, but like, I was like, I'm proxying this. It's a placeholder mana base. So if somebody actually just clicks purchase on it, that'd be crazy.
I think part of the fun is like either the cards are giga expensive because they were only printed like once and they do such a niche thing that no one like Magic has not thought about since they printed it in like the 90s, or it's like bottom barrel. There's a billion copies of it. It's 50 cents. And so I think it's fun when I'm making decks. I'm like, why is this card so expensive? And then I'm like, oh, it was printed one time and it's like a rare or something like that.
It's on the reserve list and everybody has invested in.
Or it's on the reserve list.
Yeah, on the reserve list. And you're like,
this like 90s jank card.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Word of Command, I think is a good example of that.
That's
it has a
one.
wall of text, which is irrelevant. You have to read the Oracle text because it's been super eroded. And it just is like, it's a huge mess. I'm not even going to read it on the podcast.
It's like you control the next spell your opponent casts and you like tap their mana, but like I assume they word it in a way where they can't just automatically tap
oh yeah, like
mana.
they can't do it in response. I read something about that because
it was something like that.
Yeah.
Some mess like that.
Yeah. I looked at it for like a judge deck where it's like things that get the judge called on you. I'm like, yeah, this thing is horrifying.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't even put it, but I was like, this is too expensive and no one will want to actually play this. Play something that's actually more fun, I think.
God, looking at the version, the Masters Edition version of the card that has the full Oracle text is so gross.
It's a mess.
It's a novel.
One thing I want to talk about is in terms of like building strange decks, where does everybody land on the trying to win aspect? Like, how important do you feel it is to incorporate I don't even want to say realistic win con. Maybe that's too strong a word. A somewhat realistic win condition. Like in theory, if you can make a 1/1, that's a win condition. But like something more than that, like an actual plan of some sort to win.
So this is something that all of my decks have, and this is something that all of my opponent's decks hopefully have when I play. But I'm not saying it's like a moral failing if your deck can't win the game, so long as the table is ready for that. If you're like, hey, listen, guys, I'm doing some bracket 1 stuff, or I'm like, I have a deck that's doing something silly, I'm just going to be here. Like, that's disruptive to a game of Commander where everyone wants to win, but it's not disruptive if you want to crack a couple brewskis and fucking do something stupid, right? Like,
yeah,
like it's all about expectations. And so long as the expectation's set, there's nothing wrong there. I mean, you've built a bad deck, just like, period. But if it's fun then it doesn't matter if it's not able to win the game, and if everyone's cool with that, then like I don't know, it's just not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, as long as everyone's on board.
Yeah, and I think I tend to follow a similar ethos. I mean, I don't have bracket 1 decks, and that doesn't really appeal to me. I guess maybe on some level it appeals to me as just like a goofy little one-off thing, but I don't think I could ever get into that as like a consistent sort of thing. So I do tend to go for decks that have some win con. A lot of times the weird thing is the win con, which I think helps it to be more focused. Although something else that my friend Hans, who I talk about sometimes, has done is where the deck will have some like grand goal, but it also has, you know, plenty of ways to win that kind of tie into that goal, but kind of don't. Like he had a Slay the Spire chainer deck where the goal is to use Necropolis Fiend.
Oh, sorry, Necropolis Fiend? What the hell is this?
Yeah.
You want to read it for the audience? Because I feel like a lot of people won't know what that is.
Sure. So the goal, a goal of this deck, the conceptual goal of this deck is to create a Magic deck that plays a Slay the Spire style game where you're just kind of repeatedly looping a set of cards. Kind of like Doomsday, but kind of not. So there's this card called Necropolis Fiend that lets you exile cards from your graveyard en masse as an activated ability. So you can exile kind of very specific cards that you don't want in your end game pile, and then use shuffle into library effects like Elixir of Immortality to shuffle the other stuff back into your library, and then just repeatedly have this kind of end game endless Doomsday pile. Very weird idea, but the deck also just does a lot of kind of interesting mono black control type looping things. It has some like theft effects to get, you know, some sort of win con other than like just overwhelming value. So that's an example of where the concept of the deck itself doesn't necessarily win, but there are also things tangential to the concept that do win. And when you do kind of reach that conceptual goal, it both is fun and it kind of pushes the deck toward winning.
What's great about that deck actually recently is that there was a really good win condition printed for it. It was in Duskborn, Doomsday Excruciator.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's nasty.
That's a deck I was brewing for a little while. It was like a self-mill control deck with 1,000-year elixir, because you self-mill yourself and then you Doomsday Excruciator, and then you can reshuffle your graveyard into your library and then just wait until all of your opponents deck out.
Oh yeah, because it only exiles your like the libraries, not the graveyard.
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah, does not touch the art at all. So you like grave purge all the creatures in your graveyard back into your deck, and then you just like wait for your opponents to lose.
That's excruciating. Yeah.
One of my patrons submitted a Gonti, like original mono black Gonti Doomsday Excruciator deck that was just kind of like a, you know, mixture of Gonti theft things and Doomsday Excruciator things, with obviously kind of some synergy aspects that Doomsday, you know, you can still exile cards from your opponent's library with Gonti, and it also gives you like stuff to play after you've kind of gotten rid of the rest of your resources. I definitely considered doing a copycat deck of that, although I think eventually I decided it probably wouldn't be interesting long term, and I would probably be spending money on a bunch of mono black staples. So
talking about weird niche archetypes, you know, this episode does remind me that I have been looking at a lot of mill decks, and we all know mill is unplayably bad.
What sort of mill deck have you been looking at?
Okay, so I'm not talking Brewvac like combo, because that's really not mill in my mind.
Yeah, for sure.
There's like I called the deck War Crime. It's in my considering folder. It's using Shigeki, Jukai Visionary, and Traumatize effects, and you traumatize yourself first, and then you use Shigeki to rebuy Fogs and Regrowth effects and the Traumatize, and you turbo fog the table while traumatizing their library bit by bit until they lose.
Wow.
That's really
Oh
funny.
my God.
That's ambitious. So it's like a control riff, kind of?
Yeah, a little bit of like a turbo fog, like Popper turbo fog. It's like it's mill related and all that.
Yeah.
Very evil. There's another one that was really evil that I made for a friend because he wanted a reality chip deck, and this one was awesome because this was like a live deck building moment for me. Reality chip works really well with a lantern control plan because you can manipulate the top card of your library. If you hit like 2 lands in a row or something, you can make everyone mill and then play the next card, right?
Sure.
Reality chip's a future side effect in the command zone, for those that don't know. Lets you play cards off the top of your library.
It's also a jellyfish.
It is also a jellyfish equipment, etc. It's weird. But anyway, so that plan of lantern control, a card that works really well with it is River Churn Monument. Any number of target players each mill 2 cards is the first ability on that card. But the second ability is any number of target players mill cards equal to the number of cards in their graveyard, which is actually insane. And it works like Brewvac if you have a traumatize.
Yeah.
Because if you traumatize someone and mill half their deck, you can then river churn, exert them, and then mill the other half of their deck.
Exhaust, so not exert.
That's what I meant. My bad. And I found that really interesting because it's not just Brewvac where it's sitting there as a combo piece. It actually has a plan A and a plan B. So like if you draw the Maddening Cacophony, you can win the game with the River Turn Monument. But until then, the River Turn Monument actually has a use case as a mill engine for your Lantern control, which is something I like a lot more than just like Brewvac's in my command zone. And when I draw the Cacophony, you all lose. And that's the only reason why Brewvac's there.
See, those are the kind of strange decks that I like, you know, like I want to see those kind of like weird, goofy decks, you know, and like even though Incremental Mill or whatever is like super jank and like bad as a win con, like it's fine if your deck isn't like good.
Even then, we also got the Blue Crystal in Final Fantasy soon.
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem for me is when you have like straight up no win con and you're just like, I have a lot of triggers or whatever. And it's like, okay, cool. But like, do we ever, like, what are the point of these triggers? Like, are we just watching you do triggers for no end?
I love when a Saga or Planeswalker player takes like a 20-minute turn and there's like 50 million game actions and it results in all of us losing 3 life.
Do you want to hear the ultimate version of no win cons?
Okay.
I'm going to steal another deck from Hans because he has so many deranged brews that he's made at some point in time. He was annoyed by some EDH games where it felt like everybody just wanted to do their own thing and not interact.
So
he built an he didn't build this in paper because it's kind of expensive. It's not that expensive, but it's an Oswald Fiddlebender deck whose goal is getting the game to a state where nobody can win or lose, and then just like passively doing nothing from there, just letting people do whatever they want.
The ultimate spite deck.
There's a card called the Faceless Haven where it's a land that could become a man land that has all creature types.
Yes.
I think Mutavault would be similar, but
You can also do it with Mutavault.
You can use Mutavault as well.
there's also a card called Book of Exalted Deeds that lets you put a counter on an angel you control that you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. And then there was some other thing to protect lands. And then that was this deck, was you make it next to impossible for anybody to win or lose the game. I mean, I guess you could win the game, but the deck doesn't have any win cons. So he referred to it as a modern art exhibit on the State of EDA. Kind of a spite deck. He didn't actually build it, but it's a kind of a very strange and I find it amusing conceptual deck.
That makes me think of the modern art where it's like the blood sweeper, like it's like just trying to clean, but it like just moves the puddle around. Have you guys seen that one?
yeah, it's a good piece of art.
But I'm like, that's what I'm thinking, where it's just you're just playing solitaire and you have nothing. That's why at least in more of the decks I've been brewing, I'm like, all right, if it's gonna be weird, we need to put ourselves on a clock where we will die and we will lose the game. So that way at least the game can end and we can play something else. Because
you can go terrorize a different pod.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's sort of like, you know, if I'm going to subject Elk to a game where I'm playing like a bracket 2, I at least don't want to take up more than like an hour of their time with that kind of thing. Because it's like, you know, it's a game of chance where it's like, all right, no matter how janky or how good the deck is, for the most part, like you could still like dead draw. You can still have weird long turns that do nothing. And so at least there's like an escape. So they'll be more willing to let you play your weird stuff if they know, all right, this guy dies in, you know, 30 minutes to himself and his weird.
Quips, I have a feeling you'd be a really fun player to Worst Fears. I want to control your turn, pal.
Yeah. Oh boy. Good luck. Yeah.
There's like enchantments that like make you lose the game after like 3 or 4 turns.
Yeah. Oh, I love those ones. Those guys are my favorite. Like the Demonic Pact and
yes, I think that's the one I was thinking of.
yeah. I just want to like captive audience somebody and then take it back. Like be like, give me that. Give me that. Give me that one.
Have you ever tried using the card Shared Fate in EDH?
What is that card?
Is that like Wedding Ring but in reverse?
No, this one's crazier than Wedding Ring.
Oh,
so
it's weird. Yeah, I know this card.
Oh, that card.
It's 4 and a blue for an enchantment. If a player would draw a card, that player exiles the top card of one of their opponent's libraries face down instead. Each player may look at cards exiled with this enchantment, and they may play lands and cast spells from among those cards. So you stop drawing from your deck and you have to draw from other people's decks. And you can play their lands to color fix to play their cards as well.
That's awesome. Put that in the Gonti.
That's just a chaos card, isn't it? Effectively.
No, because you can make your deck really useless. You can play like transmute cards that search for it that are like pretty bad. There's like ways to like actually like
But
utilize it.
if people know your deck is dog shit, they can just pick a different player's library, right?
Yeah, it's not as good in multiplayer. Not that it was ever good in 1v1, but
There was some weird trick with this card that like did some stupid stuff. And of course, this is just like a lock card with Drannith Magistrate, isn't it?
yes, yeah. With Jank Magistrate, you can actually like lock people out with
I
it.
feel like every chaos card is also secretly a stacks piece.
It's true. It's most chaos cards because Drannith Magistrate exists. It's like, wow, this is about to lock the game out, isn't it? And then they have to be like, no, I don't run Drannith. It's okay.
I mean, I think some are less than others, but there was like the 5-mana enchantment from it's like Dragon's Maze that like
Possibilities from
really is a stacks piece in secret. Like that's not even a chaos card. That's just a stacks piece.
Oh my goodness, I play a lot of counter spells, so that card always ruins me because I'm just like, oh, I spun into negate. It's useless.
You say that card always ruins you. How often do you play
Who
against
are you
this card?
playing with? Yeah.
Dude, I talked about this on the last podcast. I played against I had a friend who built the Gruul Rurkthar stacks list.
Yeah, Rurkthar's really
yeah,
funny with Possibility Storm.
Oh,
That's
is that the one
funny.
where you take 6 damage whenever you cast a spell
Yeah.
or something?
So you cast an artifact and then you Possibility Storm into another non-creature and then you take 12.
You just take
You just take
12.
12.
It was really funny.
All right, see, but that's like not even that bad because you die. Like at least you
No.
lose, you know?
No, that Rurkthar stacks deck killed players. That was not chaos. That
Yeah.
ended games.
I love Beseiju.
Yeah, that card's busted.
I should build a Rurkthar deck.
You should build a Rurkthar deck.
I would enjoy it. I know myself. I played Liesa for a couple years. I would enjoy it.
I would play Liesa so much if I wasn't a dirty, horrible hipster. She just looks so cool.
Yeah, just do it. As long as you don't build it life gain, it's not mainstream. The commander set one.
Yeah.
I mean, both Liesas, in my opinion, are pretty cool.
Yeah, the other one's like kind of a fun aristocracy one, but I'm talking about Shroud of Dusk, the one that drains players.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we move on to like Besiege the Mirror, I wanted to do one more kind of round of talking about how do you go about finding one of these alternative weird goals to actually build the deck around in the first place.
For me, it always started with just like, what's something I like in my daily life? Because at least for Magic the Gathering, it's sort of like, it's...
Drunk driving, for instance.
Yeah, something, hey, I told you that in confidence. No.
Wait, did you make a door hinges one? Are you a door hinge enthusiast?
No, not exactly. But I like to say I'm the like super unhinged guy. And so they're like, build a door one where there's only doors. And so I had to do that. I went to Home Depot. It was a whole thing.
That was a good video.
Thank you. I had a ton of fun with that. That's why I'm like, a lot of these like jank decks where it's sort of like you go out of your way to like have a new experience because there's always going to be Boros, equipment decks you can build. There's always going to be Simic landfall shenanigans you can build. But sometimes every once in a while you come across something real weird. Like I built like a Death Note style deck with the Orzhov guy, Karlov, where he's like, all right, let me write your name down in my book and exile you from the battlefield. Where it's sort of like, oh, you can play cool cards, but like flavor the deck differently. So that way it's got a new flavor to it. It's got, I don't know. I'm very much into the narrative storytelling aspect of games where no matter how like weird Universes Beyond gets, where it's like, all right, my Doctor Who guy fights your Warhammer guy. I still think that's super awesome because I would watch that movie. You know what I mean? So I think that's why sort of picking a theme is always fun. So sort of like, oh, dude, I love cowboy stuff. Thankfully, they just printed a lot of cowboy stuff. So you could just do like a whole kind of fistful of dollars thing and like try and recreate, I don't know, like a movie as close as you can in Magic or like a D&D class to play as like a very wizard theme. I love playing wizards in Dungeons and Dragons. And so you'd be like, all right, I'm running all wizards. I'm just gonna be doing a lot of like spell casting, it stuff. I'm shooting fireballs. I'm drawing cards. I'm learning stuff. Cause thankfully Magic supports so many different like themes and there's really no way you can go wrong as long as you know that people don't have to play with you. You just have to ask nicely. So
Do you have a favorite concept deck you've built?
I'll split this into two just because I love talking about it. My first deck I ever built was when I first learned about Magic from my buddy, it was a Baloth Baratil Entertainer with a noble heritage background because I love the idea of just like politic at the table where it's like, all right, everyone take your like, you either take your +1/+1 counters and you're not goated, but I'm safe from you, or I get the counters, you don't take them, and now you're goated against my opponents. And I like that sort of like vizier type, like sitting back and like, yes, attack my enemies for me. because I was so new to Magic. I was like, I don't know what the right move is. So I'm just going to make you guys fight each other and I'll like try and learn from the back line.
God, I love Goad.
Good. I mean, Goat's my favorite mechanic. I mean, we could.
Same.
It's just so much fun. I mean, it makes games go by so much faster and stuff like that. So that's why I love janky decks that you just throw some Goat in there just for fun.
I love that as like a vibe deck. I'm a big fan of vibe decks that make me feel feelings.
Yeah. Or just like, dude.
That's a good one.
But I think the favorite one, I've made so many at this point. I think my favorite concept, just because I think it's so like nostalgic, is I built a Yu-Gi-Oh! Like face down thing where you just try and place as many things face down. And if I ever built this one in paper, I would love to just be like, I played this card face down. And it would just get so annoying, like to just do the same bit over and over again. But I love
dual disc to the game shop.
Yeah, exactly. We're just like, dude, I played this card face down because it's well, what's her name? Vanifar Evolved Enigma, where you can put any card you want cloaked face down during combat. It could be an instant, it could be a sorcerer. Your opponents don't know, and I think that's what's super fun about it. Is you just get to have that kind of mystery vibe of like, is it a trap card? Is it a land that I can't turn up and can do nothing with? You'll never know. And so I think that one's been my favorite so far because I just love the idea of having a dual disc and doing some Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime style stuff because I loved watching that kind of Bakugan and Beyblade, like super just like energetic ways of playing the game that no one at a regular game store ever plays like. But just to hit him with, my grandfather's deck has no pathetic cards, and you just, put a forest down and pass.
Is that your next video? You're gonna ask your grandfather for 100 cards?
That would be awesome. That would be sweet. He'd be like, I don't know what that is. I served in World War II. So yeah, what about you guys?
I was gonna say Vanipar's just like a really funny commander.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've never seen anyone play this.
As long as you're willing to not like put just like nothing but Blightsteel Colossus in your deck, Vanifar is super funny.
And that's sort of like, even if you're gonna build something weird and wacky, if like one card is if you get one Blightsteel, your opponents will always be like, okay, well, I don't know how janky his deck is, but I know he's got a Blightsteel in there. So I got to respect him.
Yeah, your turn to pace, buddy.
It's a strong idea of the vibes.
Yeah, exactly. You're just sort of like, I've got one nuclear code in here, and you'll never know which one it is.
For me, it's mostly kind of what Snails sort of touched on earlier, which is like my win cons are a little bit wacky. I always start my decks with a commander level threat. That's what I like to call them. Like, something like Questing Beast might be a good standard level threat, or like, Pioneer level threat or Cube level threat. Like, it's very good in limited, right? A Questing Beast. But in Commander, unless you have another like whole board of like 50/50s, Questing Beast isn't doing anything besides looking pretty and maybe stopping a fog. So for me, that's like, I want a giant angel that beats my opponents to death. That's my Brazella deck. Emrakul looping with Clement the Worrywart. That's the Clement deck. In Farrakha, it's a wide board. And then, I just pump up my board huge, or use Insidious Roots, which can make insurmountable like blockers. And notice that none of the things I've said so far are necessarily that weird, right? This is just like normal Commander bracket level 3 things. It's like, these are cards, mostly asterisks, right? Like Emrakul and Insidious Roots do see play in other formats, but these are cards that are mostly just unplayable in other formats. Like Cormella, Glamour Thief. One of my favorite finishers in that deck is Profane Transfusion. I'm running Worst Fears in that deck. Fevered Suspicion. Like, these cards, Cruel Ultimatum. Tell me the last time you saw that in a format. It's like been probably more than a decade. I like taking inspiration from other formats and just finding a card that I like, and then just sort of building a shell around it that is synergistic, can keep me alive until I do the thing. And that's mostly it, really. It's like none of my decks are too wacky or weird or out there, I don't think.
Before I give my answer, I just want to defend Questing Beast as a commander. Like, as a finisher, I agree with you. That's like a standard level threat, but this is a cool commander. It makes all your fogs one-sided.
Yeah. To be clear,
and then you play like Death Touch creatures is cool.
To be clear, I like Questing Beast as a card and commander. You should play it. It's really funny when the one player just gets smoked through the One Ring, right?
Yeah, it's funny.
But it's not a finisher, right? Where it would be in a standard environment.
But I do think I agree with you in terms of like when I'm constructing a strange deck, it oftentimes centers around weird or lesser used cards. Like we were just talking about it before we started recording. But I was looking into the card Sift Through Sands, which is this like goofy card where if you cast 2 other specific named cards, it grabs the Unspeakable from your deck and puts into play, which is another jank like old Kamigawa creature that like grabs arcane spells. So like, focusing on like weird or like wild research I mentioned before, if you try to focus on these and fit these and build around these weird things within your deck, it's going to make your deck have a sort of like mini game separate goal to it. And I think that can be really fun.
Yeah, I think this is like the beauty between bracket 2 and 3. Like bracket 2, you can really thrive, and even bracket 1, you can thrive with like, oh look, all of my cards have activated abilities. Well, that's actually Zerda. That's actually
That's
kinda
just
decent.
yeah.
But like you can build a restriction or a theme into your deck and maybe not necessarily have the strongest way to win. And there's a zone for that. And then bracket 3, you have this nice, beautiful zone where you can be like, I'm playing cards that can close the game, but are not necessarily the best, top 10 cards that can close the game. Like I can't play CEDH. I don't want to play CEDH, right? But like I'm like a mile away from a Thoracle, but it can still win, right? And then, pushing up the brackets, you get stronger and stronger decks. I like the tiered system that's been going on recently.
I guess for my final note here, I will mention a conceptual deck that I did not buy because it ended up like $200 or $300, but I saw the card Myth Unbound, and I wanted to build a deck that was a combo with that. So I built a Rograk Kydel deck that had the goal of casting an infinite number of times.
Hell yeah.
Because you can do that as long as you have Myth Unbound and Animar, or some combination of those and like a card that copies another card. If it's Animar, obviously you need to have it, get around Legend Roll somehow. But I found that idea extremely funny. It is funny. It's probably not all that interesting in terms of long-term gameplay, but I love decks that just have some really stupid goal like that.
Who's the 7-mana pirate guy with partner? Oh,
Dargo? Oh yeah.
Yeah, Dargo the Shipwrecker.
yeah, Dargo.
See, but that's actually good.
That's like CEDH viable.
That's actually good.
I know that is like an actual combo, but yeah, it is kind of a way to loop the commander. Although the funny part is, if your combo gets interrupted, your commander does cost infinite more, which is funny.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to note that the card Myth Unbound, I didn't know this was a Scryfall tag. There's a Scryfall tag called Commander Tax Evasion.
That's awesome.
This is cool.
Is that for like the Yuriko? Like you can shadow
Yeah,
your way through?
Yuriko's in here.
Yeah, Derevi.
Derevi. Tevish Zot's in here because he steals from the command zone.
Yeah.
Ah, there you go.
On the opposite end, I love the stuff like Henzi, where he has like command, you pay your taxes, you get like rewarded. I wish that was like a bigger mechanic.
I mean, that was like the original one, right?
Yeah,
With
yeah, Prosh.
Prosh, right?
Brosh. There's that green one, like the more mana you cast, the more 1/1 counters.
The Naya one.
The Naya one, they had to errata day one because
Yeah.
Will of the Wild. They had to errata at day one because you could just zero into the X and infinitely combo with impact tremors.
Yeah, that was funny. Now specifies X can't be 0. Yeah, that's really funny. I forgot about that.
Yeah, no, I do enjoy that quite a bit. Like, I think Jarina Kudrow is one of those, not the Orzhov one, but the Mardu one. That was the Ikoria precon with flawless maneuver. I love how I have to identify the Ikoria precon by what
Which good one it came with?
broken, stupid, bullshit free spell it came with.
Did
Yeah.
it come with deflecting swat? Okay, it's the other one then. My bad. Yeah.
Do we want to move on to Beseech the Mirror?
Yeah, so we're moving on to the Beseech the Mirror section. This is where you ask us questions. All you got to do is put mirror in your comment, and we'll get to your questions on the podcast. Jack Garn, 4 numbers, asks, Mirror, I unsleeve and rifle shuffle my deck to ask you how you test your decks. Do you goldfish? And if so, how do you think about interaction when goldfishing? Are any of you big goldfishers?
Yeah, I goldfish constantly. It's like a little stim toy for me.
Do we need to explain what goldfishing is, though? Will people know that?
Sure, yeah. Goldfishing is just when you build a deck and then play it without opponents. A lot of times you'll use a play tester in an excellent website like Architect, and you will, just see how are you drawing. A lot of times I'll just test out opening hands. That's going to be the first part of it. You can calculate some amount of stuff by doing the math, but it's good to kind of find an opening hand, see how many mulligans it takes to get one you like, see how the first, I usually go 5 turns, sometimes 6, sometimes 4, but just some number of turns to get to the mid game. See how that rollout feels. Are you hitting your goals? And are you kind of satisfying what your deck wants to satisfy? Are you getting something up and going?
Yeah, so the beautiful thing about goldfishing is you can just throw interaction out the window. So what I mean by this is, of course, make sure that you're drawing enough, like you're seeing 1 to 2 pieces bare minimum in opening hands or in those first 5 or so turns of the game. You'll feel them clog up your hand in that sort of single player setting, but it's important to have those 2 just come up and just be like, okay, great, I can protect myself, or I can, interact when I need to. the major thing for me whenever I goldfish and I'm goldfishing a deck is, am I consistently insurmountable by turn 7? So I will typically stop playtesting around turn 7. And this is purely based on Gavin Verhey's article about brackets recently. Bracket 3 games, you should expect combos in the late game around turn 7. So the question is always, do I have a way to stop an infinite combo on turn 7? Or am I in a position with stacks pieces and pillow forting or explosive effects that I have such an advantage over this game that I could not lose it most of the time? Maybe like 80% of the time I'm favored to win, right? So that's the sort of threshold for me about whether or not I feel good about a deck, is if it is performing at that like 80% win rate feeling at turn 7. And I mean, basically at that point, you can expect to go longer in a game of Commander because there's going to be interaction from your opponents. What that's going to translate to with removal and interaction is it's maybe going to be 11 or so, but you know you can win the game by turn 7 in a vacuum, which is important. So you do not worry about removal. Just make sure you're drawing it here and there, but just do not worry about being interacted with during that playtest. Just set the minimum threshold. Like, if I'm in a vacuum, when am I happy winning? Because it's going to translate longer for everyone in the game.
I don't necessarily think that's good advice. Some of it's good advice, but I think you need to really think about how vulnerable to removal your deck is. Some decks are not vulnerable to removal at all. You do not need to think about protection. You do not need to think about what your opponents are doing. You can know that even if you eat removal, it's not going to slow you down that much. There are other decks where you will faceplant if you eat a bunch of removal. I think at that point, in that sort of deck, playing out to turn 7 is a waste of your time. You need to be, doing your own calculations of how much protection do I need. A lot of times I will shoot for a number like, if I kind of need protection, I'll shoot for a number like somewhere in the 6 to 8 range. If I really need protection, it's 10 to 12 usually, sometimes even a little bit more if we're talking like a blue deck that has counter spells. And you can kind of, I think you don't necessarily need to see protection while you're playtesting your deck to know that it has enough. Like, if you've done the math and you're like, okay, I have 12 pieces of protection, I'll draw one this often, you can have some degree of certainty in that. But I think depending on how many variables are at play in your deck, I think it's sometimes a waste of time to play out that far.
Part of it is that I just build decks that are really commander agnostic, but I could totally see that being an issue if you're like Voltronic and like, yeah, you need to have some amount of protection in your deck. But this is something you can't really play test for, right? Like you said, it's mostly through, calculators like, am I running the right ratio? Am I seeing it enough in my opening hand? Like hypergeometric calculator, like that percentage is just a vibe. And you kind of have to like feel it out. Like, am I okay with only seeing a protection spell 25% of the time in my opening hands? Do I need to run more? If that answer is no, yeah, probably. But, most of the time, like I said, just like, am I balling out by turn 7 in a commander agnostic deck where like, yeah, I don't need that much protection for Farrakha. She's an indestructible enchantment. Or I don't need that much protection for Kellen. I don't care if that guy dies or not, because most of my deck is just stacks pieces anyway. Like, it's just a Silesian tempo game.
For sure, yeah. And I think in that case, it might be valid. Although I also usually stop at turn 5 because I just find that turns 6 and 7 a lot of times take a long time if I'm playing, solo. Like, I could just, in turn 6 and 7, I could do another turns 1 to 5.
I think it is mandatory, though, if you're going to play Tom Bombadil or that new Terra who's coming out. Know what your sagas do. Really, please know what your what your good sagas are, what your planeswalkers do. I think that's also like, if you're putting a new deck together, you're just throwing in cards from each rack. I've done that. I've been there, brother. But you really got to know what you're like. How do I win with all this? What am I tutoring for with my Garruk ultimate ability or whatnot? Because I have a homie who just built the mono green Praetor. I forget his name already. Who doubles counters.
Vorinclex, Monstrous Raider.
Yeah, Vorinclex, Monsters Pain in my ass. And you just slam planeswalkers down and instant ult them. Please know what you're doing, because I've had to sit and watch him shuffle his deck while he tries to find his coolest card. So just kind of know, this is just like deck building in general. Just kind of know what your like haymakers are. And at least for like sagas and stuff, because there's a whole bunch of new ones coming out with Final Fantasy. They look so sick, but you got to know what they do and like which ones and how to use them and whatnot. I think that's the other point of goldfishing, would be like, all right, what do these do? And like, how do they tick up? How do I be faster? That way I'm not subjecting my opponents to 20-minute. All right, chapter 2. And now chapter 3. Oh, you give a mouse a cookie on this chapter. and it just goes on forever. And then at the end, we lose 3 life like Elfish.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point.
I feel like goldfishing is something that is, to me, mandatory before I ever play a deck against a real human being. Is I'm gonna like sit down and I'm gonna play it once, just like, see how things go, just so like mentally I know, okay, this is when I go for a win. I use this card and then this card, or like that's kind of the goal of the deck. I understand how the pieces work. And then I'll actually do like another round of goldfishing where I do X, Y, Z, and then I assume that somebody used removal and I take X away. And then I see how the deck functions, and then I goldfish like one more time where X gets removed immediately, and then I kind of goldfish deck 3 times like that. And that usually gives me like a good feel for like how I think the deck's gonna play out. And I always do that before I like actually like pull a deck up in front of like real people. Because yeah, especially if you're playing something like Storm, please goldfish like 50 times before you do anything. Like I love Storm. I will encourage any player to play cool, crazy Spellslinger decks, but like I've goldfished my Storm decks like a gajillion times because I don't want to be sitting there like wasting time,
Yeah, for Storm, for sure, you gotta.
Yeah, this is something that also comes up while goldfishing, just like as a final little thought, is like you'll see gaps in your mana every so often. This is something I've really seen in like a lot of my blue decks where it's like, oh, I get to float 1 or 2 mana here. Like I can make this half play and hold up a counterspell really easily while doing this. And finding those gaps where you can like, have the interaction open versus like full sending is like really valuable to glean when goldfishing, like finding out when you can do those half measures to make sure that you can still like explode someone if they're trying to do some shit.
As a double final note, I think the whole interaction in goldfishing thing is something you just really have to feel out over time. You will get a sense of at what stage in the game you'll need to deal with a removal spell. You'll get a sense of at what stage in the game somebody might play a problematic permanent. You'll get a better sense of these over time. I think as long as you are, following reasonable kind of rules for removal, running a bit more if your deck is a little bit slower, running a bit less if your deck is a little bit faster. I have a removal video coming out pretty soon. Actually, it might be coming out before this podcast. But as long as you're following kind of good baseline principles, I think it's definitely something where you'll get a better sense of things as you go.
That was a good question. We talked a lot about that. That was good.
It was a good question.
Next question comes from Spotify. Thank you, Spotify users. I do check those comments. Put that one out there. This is from Sergio, who asks, Mirror, mirror, I sacrifice a lettuce to the mollusk god to ask, what is a game mechanic or archetype that you like in concept, but avoid in real gameplay because it leads to bad gameplay patterns or a hassle to manage?
Let me look at my considered decks page.
Yeah, true. I'm also consulting.
I have an answer to this. And to me, that's Voltron. I actually don't mind the idea of it in principle. I think putting a bunch of keywords on a big guy is kind of funny. But inherently, the decks are either I load up on protection spells and some players just feel like they can't do anything about it as I just run them down and then they get salty, or they just remove my commander 3 times and my whole deck like fumbles and then I'm like, well, this wasn't fun. So I feel like, I don't know, I feel like Voltron leads to more headache than it's worth. And also, you have to keep track of commander damage it's like a bunch of extra numbers to keep track of. I like having my 1/3 utility creatures that never attack in the command zone,
I love combo decks, but recently I've not been really building them. I've been doing like insane explosive plays, but I haven't been comboing. I think I'm very fascinated by decks that are able to win a game of Commander without just like presenting 2 pieces of cardboard and saying it's over, right? This is what has me so infatuated recently with 13 mana Emrakul and War Spheres. Is like it's so funny to like have it be target player lose the game because I play their deck. Like finding lethal on yourself is such a fun, with not even your own deck, is such a fun way to win the game for you. So I think like the Emrakul deck technically has an infinite combo where it can Mindslaver permanently, but this is a like 16, 17 mana infinite for 1 player. And you need to add like maybe like 10 mana for each additional player. It's not like a Mindslaver loop where it's cheaper than like normally pretty, like it's 1 baseline cost. Like this one's like very expensive. Recently, I've just been so infatuated with Cormella too, because it's just huge instant Grixis and sorcery spells, right? And it's been a lot of fun just being like, I copy Cruel Ultimatum 3 times. You take 15, I gain 15. You discard your whole hand, I draw 9. You're not coming back from that, right? And it like I've just discovered recently, like I still have a few combo decks to my name, but like I've discovered recently the joy of just like doing explosive commander bullshit that wins the game without having to like present some like Avogadro's like contraption that just like kills someone, right?
Yusuf, put Avogadro's contraption on screen, preferably when they kill someone.
For me, I would say I like the idea, and I think a lot of players really like the idea of building like a maximally controlling stacks deck, where like, because that's some of the most interesting decks in 60 card formats are some version of that. Like Lantern Control is a horrible deck in terms of, the fact that it is stealing all this agency from your opponents, but it's really interesting because it's something new and unique. And I think, there's this temptation to do that in EDH, but ultimately in practice, it doesn't really end up being fun. It doesn't end up being this kind of unique experience. I think if you're playing like a competitive enough level, then it becomes kind of, maybe not viable right now, but it becomes, doable on a social level. But in general, it's tricky to do like a hard stacks deck. I usually do some form of like, I'll do like a Hate Bears deck or like a Group Slug deck or some other thing that is putting pressure on my opponent's decision making, but isn't, trying to restrict them down to very few actions.
Yeah, there's definitely like a event horizon for stacks and a prison decks where it becomes unfun. Like chaos can cross that threshold. I think any stacks deck without a way to win concretely crosses that threshold. Like Lavinia Knowledge Pool for me is like the perfect example of this kind of deck, where it is hard. You cannot cast spells. You need Beseiju to get out of it. You need Otawara to get out of it, right? I feel like that's just like a little bit much for what I like to enjoy. For example, my Brazella Hate Bears lock with Gaddock, you could still Solitude me. Otawara still works in that situation as well. I've been blown out in the most creative ways from that lock, and it happens like maybe like 60% of the time with this lock that I have. The other 40% I win because it's a 9/10 angel as part of the lock, so you do not live very long if you can't break it quick. And I think it's a mixture of those two things. You need to have a way to finish the game alongside your lock swiftly, or at least within a couple turn cycles, because otherwise everyone's just kind of sitting there like twiddling their thumbs like, oh, when's the Lantern player going to do something that wins the game? And you're just like, despairs my win con.
What about you, Quips? Anything you think is funny, but you don't actually play?
Elk talked about it a little bit, but when Ian Malcolm, the Chaostician, came out, I love that guy. I thought it was so sick. I mean, I love Jurassic Park. I think it's such a good movie. And for the viewers at home, basically, whenever somebody draws their second card each turn, everybody exiles. You exile one of your cards. So basically, you have this like sort of knowledge pool of cards, but it's very similar to like my point on the goldfishing thing, where it's like, you got to know your deck. And so if you're playing everybody else's cards, you have no clue what their cards do. So then it becomes that sort of decision like paralysis where you're like, I have so many cards now that I don't know. This wasn't part of my plan. And so I think like I love to be adaptable and stuff like that, but I don't want to like wish that on my opponents where it's like, all right, now you guys have to really heavily improvise your game plans and still try to win against me. Well, I'm still trying to win against you with your own cards and you're using my cards. And it's just sort of like, if I wanted to play your deck, I would have built it kind of thing. I think Chaos is fun, like Cascade style Chaos, where you're like, I don't know what's in my deck, but I'm going to hit something cool. But that sort of Chaos, like I'm playing somebody else's deck and everybody else has to play along with me. Different than like a Gonti, where it's like, I'm targeting the guy with the cool Eldrazi in his deck. I'm going to take that Emrakul if I can. But yeah, I think those are like more fun in theory to me than I think ever in practice.
Okay, that was another banger question, honestly. A lot of good questions this time around. Okay, so this question I thought was also pretty good. Ham Dog Pork Kington, 4 numbers, asks, Mirror, mirror, I declare a tax with my Birds of Paradise to ask, which strategies/generals lend themselves to being the archenemy at the table if that's the experience you're actively pursuing? Which I believe this is in reference to, I think it was last episode, Snail, you were talking about sometimes wanting to be the archenemy, the big green stomp with your green stompy deck. Just like, hey, I'm the big bad, I'm going to try and do these things. What are some good examples of commanders that do that?
I would say almost always avoid combo. Because combo is like, most of this is in your hand, and people don't see it until it's too late. So you're not really archenemy until you've already crossed the finish line, right? for me,
Yeah, I think it's got to be like a green deck where you put big things into play.
that's the thing. I don't think it necessarily has to be green. I think the number one arch enemy
It doesn't have to,
is
but
stacks, almost assuredly. Once you tell your friends you can't have fun anymore, you are immediately, there's a red target painted on your forehead. Everyone's trying to kill you. Your opponents will start showing each other their hands and like trying to solve it like it's a fucking logic puzzle. It's the funniest thing in the world. Oh, how do we blow up the Hushbringer? None of our decks work. No, you can't use Solitude. It doesn't work anymore. And they're just like, they're all like looking at each other's hands and trying to figure out a way out. So Stacks is up there, Pillow Fort style effects. I've been in love with the card Solitary Confinement recently. One of the rare instances where I like Phyrexian Arena is with Solitary Confinement because you beat the discard and skip your draw step clause of it. And Solitary Confinement basically just says Shroud and you can't be targeted. So you can just do all your Stacksy bullshit and all of your opponents are just helpless until they can disenchant it. So basically decks like that where it's just like highly interactive with highly threatening bombs. I think Kellen is the deck that I play the most that gets 3v1'd. Because I run things like Gaddock, I run things like Clarion Conqueror, and then my top end is Bruna Gisela or Elishnorn, right? My board's becoming huge. You know I have the Elishnorn in the deck. You know the big angel that shuts off half of your spells is coming down soon, right? Like, that's scary.
Yeah, I had a video about this like a year and a half ago. I called the Curse of Small Bean Syndrome. And a big part of that was kind of outlining the ways in which you can play to kind of, you know, how do I phrase this? A big part of that was how you can be kind of the opposite of a small bean, be the person who is the threat and knows they're the threat. And
the big
I
bean.
think being, you know, some sort of stack to your control deck definitely often is that. But I think the biggest thing is just being transparent about what your deck is doing. You know, the situation where this doesn't work is when you are kind of concealing information, concealing how well your deck is doing, kind of just piling up good stuff in your hand for a mad explosion out of nowhere in a later turn. What works better is to kind of be kind of fairly transparent in what you have going on, what your game plan is. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like obvious how quickly you're progressing to it, but it should become pretty clear and it should become obvious to your opponents how threatening you are, like a solid couple turns before the point where you would win without too much resistance. So there should be a strong moment, a strong window where your opponents can see, wow, this person is terrifying. And if we don't do something in the next couple turn cycles, this is going to go very badly for us. That transparency is, I think, the biggest thing you're going to want to chase.
What about you, Quips?
Yeah, I think as the resident goad enjoyer here, basically very similar to
That's me. Whoa,
Hey.
don't come on my podcast
Sorry,
and steal my title.
I love goad, bro. First video I ever made was basically I love goad and I hate mill. But basically, I think anytime you take away like player agency, I think because it's sort of like, I love playing the game. I want to play some Magic. Oh, I have to attack. All these things I wanted to do, now I have to do. Or like, goad is basically like red version of stacks where like now you have to attack. Like you can't, you know, I'm not making you unable to draw or anything, but I am taking away your decision to hold back blockers or whatnot. And so that can very quickly draw a lot of ire, especially if you're playing like goad mainly as your like win condition or as your way of like getting advantage over your opponents is using their creatures against each other. They'll target the guy who's forcing them every combat. When they go to combat, they're like, okay, well, and then you have to whisper, oh yeah, by the way, that guy has to swing. They hate that. They hate to hear that. And so that can make you the archenemy real quick. But I've also like come to embrace it. I think it's so much fun to be the bad guy. Most of the time, like, yeah, you get blown out, you like lose. But a lot of the time, like the stories people like you talking on the car ride home is not about like, oh dude, yeah, he had such a cool win. It was like, dude, we had to stop you. You were making us turn our armies against each other. You were like the big bad guy. It's sort of like everyone has to team up against Thanos. And they have to like, you know, hold back blockers or do like tricky. We had someone who had like the cons or dragons thing where like you can tap down opponent stuff. And they were using it to help their friend, to help like opponents get away from the goad. Because they're like, we don't want to hurt you. So here, I'll tap down your thing so you don't have to swing it at me. Because you would have to swing it otherwise. And so it's sort of that thing where like they're coming into that puzzle situation Elk was talking about. But I think that's kind of like, yeah, dude, you got to put some respect on my name. I'm the crazy goad player. You're trying to figure out how to get around it. I think being the archenemy is like a ton of fun. Because again, like I watched the little bean syndrome or small bean syndrome video. I do think it's kind of like shady to be like, I'm just a little guy. Like, don't swing at me. No, you got to own it. You got to be like, you're approaching me. And then you're like, yeah, well, I can't beat you up without, I think it's just like iconic. Like, Magic is a fun game. Like, you're not going to, hold it against them. You're gonna be like, dude, your deck is scared. Like, if I ever play with Elk, and I hopefully will in Vegas, I'm gonna be terrified. I'm like, their decks are crazy. I'm so scared. No matter what they're pulling out, they're gonna be like my first target, because I'm just like a reputation at the game table. I think is also super fun. Like, whoever plays the Dragon, like, everyone knows, okay, bro, you're playing the Dragon, like, you're scary, and I think that's fun to be like, all right.
I've never seen an Dragon player win.
I know, exactly. But when they do win, they feel real good about it, because they're like, you guys weren't fast enough teaming up against me, and now I win. And so I think it's super fun. What about you, Trinket?
I think you can do this with almost any deck, and I think one way to do it is just to like go for it. Just build a strong deck, and then make that very obvious from the get-go. Be like, hey, this is my fast Aristocrats combo deck. From starting now, turn 0, you guys are in trouble. And if you kind of lead into it, again, being the big bean and saying like, hey, I am the threat, will also get you that arch enemy feeling very quickly, because presumably people will believe you, and if they don't, they lose, and they'll believe you next time.
Yeah, I think if you can overstate the power of your deck, you're gonna avoid pub stomping, even when your deck is more powerful than your opponents. Like, if you can fully convey to people how strong you might be. Now, if you hit a Soul Ring on turn 1 and do some bullshit like turn 1-2 crazy opener, then maybe that's a problem. But if you can just convey that you're going to be a problem, you're not going to get as much hate, even, if you're kind of doing things that might come across as a little pub stompy.
That was a good question. I want to end this podcast with, so somebody commented, they didn't actually make it like a mirror, and they just said, can we get a segment that's just your favorite mirror prefixes? The deflecting swat one last week had me rolling. I just want to reiterate, because we said it the first time we switched the Beseech the Mirror section, is that you put mirror in your question, and then if you want, you can add you're casting Vandal Blast or whatever, right? But we've got to a point where it's kind of looped around, and I've noticed a lot of comments where people don't add that. They just put mirror, which technically you can do, but I kind of missed it. So I just wanted to reiterate here that you guys are doing great adding those segments, and I think it's really fun. And I hope you keep doing that when you ask the questions.